Welcome to the Ad Nauseam Podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 147 of our humble little podcast, Ad Nauseam, that is. I am down here in the bunker with my good friend and excellent co-host, Dr. David Noe. How you feeling, Dave?
I'm doing pretty well, Jeff. Thank you. It's Vomitorium South, the basement of the RHB bookstore, and we got a little brief shout out and then a little story I'd like to tell.
All right. Who are we shouting out today?
One Matthew Miser.
Okay.
And not a lot to say about this man, except that, as the French would say, he's a mensch.
He's a mensch.
That's right.
Yeah, that's always a good thing to be.
He's a solid guy, a generous fellow. I know he loves listening to the podcast. He's out in the woods of Pennsylvania, and because of his personal kindness and generosity, I just wanted to give him a thank you here on the air.
Is he lost in those woods? Is he wandering around somewhere?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think he's a forester.
Oh, really?
Yes.
An actual forester?
Yes.
All right.
So walk, forester, walk. We might say.
Well, excellent. Yes. Well, many thanks for being a faithful listener.
Yes. Yeah. And so I've been doing a little bit of cooking lately.
Oh, okay.
Why are you laughing?
This is a setup, isn't it? Okay.
Oh, no.
Okay. What have you been cooking?
I've been currying some chicken.
Okay.
Because my wife is of Caribbean extraction, and I thought I should get in on it and try to do a little bit of currying myself.
Yes.
And my dad happened to be over.
Yep.
Right. And once I rose above the noise and confusion,
yes,
I could kind of get a glimpse beyond this illusion. I was soaring ever higher.
But did you fly too high?
I did, right? And it wasn't going very well, the cooking, right?
Yeah.
And I said, Dad, I'm really struggling here. What do you think? Should I persist or should I just quit right now?
Right.
And guess what he said?
I can guess, but you're going to tell me, right?
He said, curry on, my wayward son.
And that gave you the fortitude to finish the dish.
That's correct.
That's awesome. Excellent.
Yeah. Kansas.
Yeah.
So Jeff, how are you feeling, and what are we up to?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling a little rusty because as I think our loyal listeners will see. It's been a few weeks since we put out an episode. Yeah.
There's been a lot going on.
Yeah.
I had a very sad death in the family, which took a lot out of me, frankly. And you've been working hard with your grading of exams. I had a little bit of travel.
Yep.
Went down to the Carolinas and visited the Veritas Preparatory School in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah, you wanted to give them a little shout out. Tell us a little bit about the school. Yeah.
Met some great folks down there. Did a teacher's in-service, taught Latin and a tiny bit of Greek for about a day and a half. Some fantastic individuals.
Excellent.
I mean, they are serious about their language instruction. I was really impressed. Got to teach an AP Latin course on Caesar's De Bello Gallico, Book 5, if memory serves.
Uh-huh.
And the students in that class, they were firing on all cylinders.
Is that right?
That's right.
Wow, so prepared, and did they keep you on your toes?
Very impressive. Yes. I made one of them get up and do a little bit of a victory lap, which is one of the things I do in the class.
He's celebrating a triumph?
Yeah, you get something right, you get to parade around the classroom. Alternatively, if you get something wrong, you have to crawl around it on your knees.
Yeah, that sounds about
No,
right.
I don't do that. So yeah, it was a very good time. Good to be down there in the Carolinas. And Jeff, what are we up to today?
We have another interview.
All right.
This is one Dr. Kirk Summers, who I believe he's a friend of yours.
He is.
Okay. And
I wouldn't say we're besties, but getting close.
Oh, excellent. Right.
Yep.
So who is Kirk Summers, and how do you know him? And maybe set this up a bit.
Well, he is a professor of classics at the University of Alabama, Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
He's an incredible scholar, polyglot. He's also an entrepreneur. And we can ask him some questions about that, I suppose.
Yeah.
He's one of the world's leading scholars in the 16th century Reformation, Renaissance theologian and poet Theodore Beza.
Oh, wow.
And Beza lived from 1519. That's when he was born. He died in 1605, 86 years.
That's pretty good for the 16th century.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And a fantastic life. And Kirk is, I don't know, the world's leading expert, or he's in the top 5 for sure.
Yeah.
And I have been privileged to be associated with him and to work together on a few projects. Fantastic Latinist. And we're going to talk today about his book called A View from the Palatine.
Oh, I've stood on the Palatine.
Yeah. It's the subtitle, The Juvenilia, of Theodore Beza. So
and I believe these were poetry that he wrote. Was this before he converted?
It was before his conversion to the Reformed faith. And after the publication, around 1548, Kirk's going to tell us all about it.
Yep.
He fled Paris and went down to Geneva, and the course of his life changed dramatically.
Interesting.
So without, as the Germans would say, without further ado, let's welcome Kirk to the program. Welcome to the show, Kirk. We're so glad that you could join us this afternoon. And could you tell us a little bit about your actual background there on the Zoom screen?
That background back there?
Yes.
Roll Tide, right? You got to be a believer. You live in Alabama.
I see. So that's an Alabama football reference. Am I correct?
Yeah. And, you have to pick a side when you come to Alabama. You got to be either War Eagle or Roll Tide.
Got it.
And that's how people communicate on the street when they walk by each other.
Mm-hmm. It's one or the other. So we're here today to get to know you a little bit, to introduce you to our listeners, many of whom teach classics, study classics, parents of classicists, so on and so forth. And so we'd like to start out with a little bit of a biography. How did you get into the classics? What is your educational background and what drew you to them?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, which is not a classical mecca, of course, but my father was very well educated. He was a Presbyterian minister, very much a Calvinist, Westminster Confession kind of guy. And so he had a doctorate in theology, and, our house was just full of books. Theology, he loved the ancient world. He could tell you all about Caesar, history of Christianity, philosophy. And, there was no internet. So as a kid, I read these books that were surrounding us. When I got to high school, I took Latin. And that was sort of the thing that I excelled in the most. And so when I got to college, I took Greek because I was thinking, well, my father really was pushing me to go to seminary. Okay. He wanted one of his sons to go to seminary and be a minister. So I took Greek in college, and we started out with Clyde Farr's Homer.
Oh, yeah.
And I just absolutely loved it. And if you can believe, this professor was insane. We did all of Clyde Farr's Homer in one semester. I think it has 70-something chapters in it. So it was all or nothing. Not many people survive that class. But it clicked for me, and it was something that was it just felt natural, and I felt ready for it. So I did go to seminary, but while I was there, I taught Latin in high school part-time, and although I did my seminary work, I also spent a lot of my time reading classics, keeping up my Greek and Latin. And so when I finished seminary, the last minute I decided, I'm going to be a total failure as a minister. I'm not called to do this. I don't feel it. And so someone offered me an MA unexpectedly at the University of Nebraska, and I said, I'm going.
And there you worked on Isidore of Seville's Adversus Judaios, your CV says?
I did, with a very good patristic scholar there who, he's no longer there, but he led me down that path.
Mm-hmm. And that was...
Then I went to Illinois.
Okay.
Did a PhD in classical philology there with under J.K. Newman.
Mm-hmm.
And about the time I was defending my dissertation, I got a job at Loyola Chicago, and I took it and stayed there 2 years, and the Alabama job came calling, and it was close to home, so I took it.
Now, when you went up for your MA at Nebraska and started to work there, was that at that point where you say, okay, this is what I want to do? And it was kind of clear you were going to go on for a PhD, or was it still kind of like...
This has been on my free time doing it, so I thought that this is what I should be doing. And so, yeah.
So this never occurred to me, Kirk. We've been friends for a few years now, but as I look at your CV, you were at Loyola Chicago between 93 and 95. That's exactly when I applied there for grad school, and I was accepted, but I decided not to attend. Did you read my application?
No, I was the newbie there, and and share things like that with me.
They didn't say to check this guy out, this joker.
Yeah. Well, you got the education you needed, so good for you.
Yeah, I'm thankful for that. Very thankful for that. So what drew you to our man, Teddy Beza? How I see that you worked with Douglas Kelly for one of your master's degrees, but then you decided to pick up Beza again later on.
Yeah, and I had already stumbled on Beza by accident. In fact, in that same Homer class, we would meet in the professor's office, and he was quite the character, a really good scholar, but his desk was full of books, and he would sit with his feet propped on the desk, and he'd smoked a pipe nonstop and spouted Homer stuff, So one day we're sitting in the class reading Homer, and in walks a librarian. The librarian's holding a book and says, "Oh, excuse me, I didn't know it was a class. I wondered, Dr. Clark, if you would tell me what this book is. It's in our library, and we don't even know what it is, and it's in Latin." And he opened it up, and he said, "Oh, this is Theodore Beza." And then he looked at me, and he said, "Well, you should know who he is." And ashamedly, for all my reading, I did not know who he was, and from the Calvinist background, and that really speaks to Beza studies at the time, right? That you could be immersed in Calvinism and not know who Theodore Beza was. And so I was bothered by the fact that I didn't know who he was. And so it sort of became my obsession, and I could find so little information at the time on Beza. So it just became sort of my obsession after that.
Now, how do you, I might be getting ahead of things, but how do you account for that? Now, I should admit straight up, anything after Constantine for me is very foggy. So I'm very new to this stuff. But from what I know about Beza, he was kind of the heir apparent to Calvin and kind of taking up the mantle. And so how do you account for the fact that, as you say, is someone who's immersed in Calvinist studies, you didn't even come across the name? Why did he disappear in that regard?
And it's still that way. I was speaking to a room of scholars, and Beza came up, and nobody in the room knew who he was, and there were like 40 people there, and I said, but if you lived in the 16th century, you would know who he was, and the Puritans surely knew who he was, and people on their grand European tours, Beza was one of their stops in the late 1500s. So, but I think one of the things I've said in the past is that a lot of his stuff didn't get translated from Latin. Just the sort of heavy theological works that the Puritans needed early on got translated. And so there was a vast amount of material that was all in Latin, and there just aren't that many Latinists working in the Reformation, which is sort of what drew me to it as a Latinist.
Sure.
It's like you walk into Reformation studies and it's your superpower, right? You can read all this stuff. And so people kept going over the same text, and they weren't necessarily the best texts to understand Beza.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. He was a poet, right? He was a man of letters before becoming a theologian. And he's primarily known for his Life of Calvin and the Table of Predestination, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's an appendix to the Confession of Faith that he wrote? The tabula?
It appeared as a separate work.
Okay. Okay, I'm mistaken about that. So what led you to write this particular book, one that you've told me you're not all that happy about, but I think it's an enormous contribution, published in 2001 by Arizona State University, as this great title, A View from the Palatine, the Juvenilia, the childhood or childish poems of Beza. What led you to write this work?
Actually, one of the earliest volumes I got into my hands of Beza was I think it was the 1713 edition of Beza's poetry, and I stumbled on it in a bookstore. And not that long after, I had learned who Beza was. And so I thought, I've got to read this and understand it, you know. So that became part of a journey for me, and it turned out to be a difficult journey. There was a lot to understand, a lot of angles to understanding this poetry. It's Roman poetry, but it's situated in the Reformation and the Renaissance in the 16th century, right? And so the reception of it was confusing at the time for people who wanted to ignore the humanist movement and all that it entailed. So, I felt like it brought together a lot of both my knowledge of the ancient world and my love of Latin and my knowledge of this guy right here. And so it just came together that way. It's difficult to do scholarship of this type back then. I'm at Alabama. There's not that kind of library here with all these ancient texts. I did a stint at the Newberry Library, but there was no internet back then.
Right.
Where now you can see all these texts online. You can find everything. Right?
Instantly. Yeah.
Did your work entail any travel to Europe to see early manuscripts or anything like that?
I wrote to them, and they sent me pages that I needed at the time. And then I didn't get there until 2005, and there was the Beza anniversary conference of his death, because we did the conference of his birth here in 1519, right. 2019. Yeah. But 1605 is when he died. And so in Geneva, they held a kind of a conference there, and I got to go to that and speak on Beza's poetry. That was my first time to go to Geneva.
So, Kirk, in the introduction, I want to read the little excerpt of Beza's letter to Maslu Papan. Did I pronounce his name correctly?
Yes. Your French is every bit as good as mine.
Oh, I doubt that. This is on page 19, and maybe I could read the Latin, and if you have it there, you could read us your own translation, and then we can talk a little bit about what Beza means by this. Si quid agam quaeris nihil prosus, nisi quod aliquoties nugor cum musis meis, denda animi gratia in Palatium ventito, ibi omnium hominum mordres velut in amplissimo teatro intueor.
Beautiful. So the translation that I have here is, if you want to know what I'm doing, nothing much, except that sometimes I play around with my poetry. Then for relaxation, I go to the Palatine. Now, the Palatine was a specific place there in Paris, but kind of my point with the title of the book is that is the Romanness of the poetry in itself, right? So there I watch the pageant of people's lives as if I'm in a vast and spacious theater.
So is Beza then making an allusion or a reference here that his pursuit of poetry is a specific kind of poetry is a Roman pursuit, but he's deliberately adapting it to a Parisian context in the 1530s?
I mean, you said it beautifully there. This is obviously an allusion to Martial's introduction to his poetry. Right. And Martial says, talks to Cato about coming into the Floralia and watching the show. And so I think when you approach Beza's poetry, you have to be sensitive to the Romanness of it. This was histrionic. It comes out of the sort of farcical, satirical tradition, the carnival tradition, because certainly the Floralia, the Saturnalia, which is alluded to often in Beza's poetry, is all part of the carnival tradition. So you've got exaggerations, hyperbole, emphasis or featuring the grotesque. Everything is turned upside down. There's laughter. And it's kind of a way of holding up a mirror to society and say, look, this is who you are. And this is what the poet priest of Rome were doing. And it's different than our Christian attitude, right? And our modern attitude of preaching and just sort of moralizing and whatever. But they would show people the foibles and have people laugh at themselves, right? Have them laugh and then laugh at themselves. And in that way, they were acting as preachers of the ancient world.
Mm. Yeah, even in the piece you just read, it's very self-deprecating, right? He's writing poetry, but he's saying, "Oh, poetry is what I do sometimes, but what I like to do is go and people watch." Right? So he's writing serious Roman poetry, but it's kind of cheekily dismissing it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people refer to these ancient writers like Catullus and Martial and Ovid and so forth as love poets, and you'll see books written in the love poets, whatever. But the interesting thing about love poetry, and Beza does follow a girl around in some of the poems, Candida, just like the ancient poets did, as his love interest.
Yeah,
but it's not meant to be autobiographical, and that's why I say it's histrionic. But love was that vehicle through which you could look at all the human experience, because love encompasses all the emotions. I mean, you think about anger, and then you write something about anger, and then you sort of stop there. But what if it's a love interest and you get angry? But love, can change. It can be ambivalent. It can be elated. It can be sort of confused. There's all these emotions, and they all run through love.
Mm.
And so love is that medium through which these poets talk to humanity about the human experience.
Mm. That's very well put. So we could just as well call them, Catullus and company. We could, Propertius, Tibullus, they could be the hate poets or the indifferent poets, or any one of the other emotions that they examine and make fun of. But I guess you're saying that love is the prism that ties all those things together, and that's why they have that moniker.
Yeah, I just can't think of another emotion that,
right,
and have obsession and disgust in the same.
Right.
And Catullus says that, I hate and I love.
Right.
And I'm doing both at the same time, and I can't explain it. So that's love. And so in that sense, he's a love poet. But that's not what they mean. They mean he couldn't control himself. He really was in love with a specific girl. Let's figure out who she was and so forth. And you're missing the point. The poet's elusive in this. He's talking about you. You're supposed to be looking back at yourself, not at And that's different than modern poetry, of course.
Yes. I'm hoping later in this episode you can help us out with another area of your specialty expertise, and that is how Beza, for a long time then, had to apologize for the youthful indiscretion and even the charge that he was run out of Paris by the Senate, for immorality. But we want to kind of tease the audience with that, talk about it later, and do some other things first. So the first poem in the collection, this is on page 6, is the Descriptio Publi Decii Patris from the Sylvae. And rather than Jeff or I explaining to the audience what occasional poems are, I think you would do a better job, Kirk. What are Sylvae?
Sylvae refers to the woods. It's just material that you use to get across a point that you want to make. So it's any sort of material that you want to use out there in the world, and you write a poem with it, but it usually's got some sort of aim behind it. You're building something with the material.
Mm-hmm. So that's the metaphor. And rather than the collection having an overarching theme like the Metamorphoses, which is about change and mythology, the Sylvae or the Sylvae are written for specific events, and they're not necessarily connected in a broader pattern. Is that right?
Yeah. And that's what you see here in the Sylvae.
Right. So maybe we can read a little bit of the beginning here. I don't know, I could read a couple of lines of hexameter, and then you can give us some translation, and we can talk about this first poem in the collection. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Iam roman naki eis virti iam cedere laevo, coiperat in cornu virtus romana nec ullum, subsidi est retro quamnis space lapsa referi. So what do we have there, Kirk, and how does this contribute to Beza's overall project, please?
Yeah. So the Roman line had begun to falter, and the soldiers on the left wing began to lose their courage. No reinforcements come to their aid, and all hope dissolves into retreat. Obviously, he's taken story of Roman history, and he's going to present it in a very dramatic fashion and a beautiful fashion, actually, and you feel the passion and the self-sacrifice that Decius is going to make.
Uh-huh. So this is the story of Publius Decius Pater, right? And the note that you write here, do you have that, Jeff, there in your notes?
I do not.
Okay. Yep. Who offered himself up as a sacrifice for the safety of his legions during a battle with the Latins at Vecerus. Livy tells the story in the 8th book of his history. Right. So as you put this volume together, you did all the research. What are Beza's sources? What are his references? And then, and why do you think he chose this poem, which talks about this self-sacrifice of Publius Decius Pater, as the first in the series? What does that tell us about Beza as a poet and as a person?
Yeah, well, what I think it tells us is that as you look through the collection, and you know, he's charged with all this indecency in the poetry, and certainly there's a little bit of that with the imitation of Catullus and Martial, but there's this strain that runs through the poetry of a very sort of thoughtful, moral, religious expression going on. It's really, you can see it weighing on Beza, that he's been reading some works that his teacher, Melchior Volmar, has given him, who was kind of a secret Lutheran. And he's being influenced by this very early on. And so he writes these poems like this, some of them making fun of the Roman Catholic Church, but others just expressing religious ideas, but always drawn from, it's as if the ancient world had touched on a lot of the truths that Christianity had discovered. There's this great poem, I may be getting ahead of you guys, but there's this great poem he's got later on in the book to Dido, and I think it's one of the places that this is the clearest. It's Dido the suicide in the Icones, or Dido about to ascend the funeral pyre is what it says in the Icones. And then in the 1548 edition, I think it's just 2 lines, right? But the translation is something like, "Girl, learn a lesson from the death of Dido." You see, that's what he's doing. You cannot rely on the bonds of friendship or the marriage bed. You can see I'm always tweaking my translations, but
right.
But the pondus there, I think, has something to do with constancy, and it's just it's not reliable. Friendship, the marriage bed, and girls should not throw themselves at it. And they're learning it through Virgil and the story of Dido, right? And that's something you see in Renaissance poetry. Dido is out of control with her emotions, and it brings about her destruction. But if you look in the later editions where he modifies a lot of this poetry, excises some of it, he modifies this particular poem. It's very telling. He renames it Dido the Suicide. And he says, "From Dido's misfortune, widows and maidens, learn how foolish love rewards the foolish. How foolish love rewards the foolish. And what lessons the profane prophets once taught, here's the key line, it should shame you not to have learned from scriptures.
So you're
later. So right here in this 1548 edition, it's the same lessons, that he knows from scriptures, but he's so fascinated by the ancient world and that the truths are there as well, that his poetry reflects that. And later, he feels like I need to focus on scripture and bring the message out.
So we might be assuming a little bit on the part of our audience here, who I can say with all flattery are probably the most educated and devoted audience in podcasting today. But the Icones were these short little poems that he wrote. And I think, Kirk, you're referring to number 2 in the collection, which is Dido Rogum Conscensura, right? Yeah. Dido about to ascend the funeral pyre. So this is a reference to, where is it, Jeff? Is it Aeneid? Is it end of book 4?
4. Yeah.
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 Right. So you're referring to that, and the Latin is funera didonis sapientes est puellae, etc. And then your translation, this is what you read, right? Just to make sure we're on the same page. Girls learn a lesson from the death of Dido. Men take lightly both hospitality and marriage. So this is Beza's original composition, riffing on the tragic suicide of Dido in the face of Aeneas's abandonment. And you're saying that later on, in a later edition, not the 1548, he made a more theological point on this.
Yes, it's the same point is made in scriptures. Let's learn it from scripture.
I get a couple questions here. How this poetry was received, and who was the target audience? Who was this for?
He had a circle of learned friends there as he went to Lyon, Paris, Bourges, and these places, and he was building this little network of friends and humanists who liked to write poetry, who were into the printing industry. He was supposed to be studying law. That's what his father wanted him to do. He was living off they call them benefices, but basically scholarships from his home church in Vézelay. And but he was sort of like me in seminary, right? He was more interested in reading ancient literature and writing poetry. So he's really writing this stuff and sharing it with his friends originally. And this is what's so interesting was we have a manuscript that he had sent to one of his friends with a lot of these poems in it. And he was a lot younger when he sent this manuscript. Now, not all of the poems are in it. He hadn't written some of them yet, but he's been writing them over several years. Now, he's 29 when he publishes them, which is why I don't really like this title, Juvenilia, and it's not his title, Poema is what his original title was. So I sort of backed off from that title, Juvenilia, because he was 29. He made a mature choice to publish, because the use of that word Juvenilia through the centuries has been used to say they were just childish, ramblings and exercises, but they weren't. He was 29 years old when he published this. This was a serious humanistic endeavor, achievement for him. And he thought it was going to propel him into the world of the great poets, Ronsard and into the humanist world of Erasmus.
So a very similar trajectory to Calvin's desire to become the next Boudet, right? Or the French Erasmus in his publishing his commentary on Seneca's De Clementia, but they both failed in that regard.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Beza would have failed as a poet any more than, I don't know how well these guys did as poets, but there were a lot of poets in the 16th century. Beza was certainly one of the the better ones, but were they failures? But you got someone like Marc-Antoine Murray, and he continued to write poetry and publish it, stay in the Catholic Church.
So the next poem in the collection, did you get your questions answered, Jeff?
I did, yes.
Okay.
Great.
I just don't want to just skip over them with total prejudice. The next poem in the collection is The Death of Cicero, right? Taken from Livy and Plutarch's Lives. So it's a 24-line poem, again written in hexameters, and it's so beautifully done. And maybe just one line: Ergut ventorum rabiem pelagique furorem. Could you read us a little bit of this poem that Beza wrote, mourning the death of Cicero? Some of the translation, please, Kirk.
Yeah, as he saw the raging of the winds, the uncontrollable fury of the seas, Cicero said, "Alas, I am ill-starred. The fates are after me. They demand the death of hapless Cicero. Change the sails and return me to the nearest bank so I can die. Rome, will you no longer be grateful now that you have escaped civil unrest? I will die. The gods resolve and decree the consul Tullius to die in the city he saved."
So
stop there.
Do you find this filled with legitimate pathos, or is it too cloying? I mean, I guess I'm always fascinated by the extent to which Rome obsessed the minds of men of the Renaissance and women too, like Olympia Murata and Anna Maria von Schoormann's late Renaissance. There was this meme that went around recently, Jeff, right? How often do men think about the Roman Empire? Yeah. I guess it's been about a year now, but however much moderns think about the Roman Empire, they have nothing on the men of the Renaissance. It seems like it was their life.
And a lot less to think about, right?
True.
Yeah, they didn't think about space travel or
the stock market, cryptocurrency.
Yeah, stock market. I think they felt a real connection to what Cicero was trying to achieve and the high ideals, and it really meant a lot to them. They wanted to live by them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess I should issue this correction. The poem is, I saw the look on your face, Kirk. The poem was actually 73 lines in length. I was just looking at the first page.
The one page.
Yeah, that's embarrassing. Huh?
That's why I didn't read it all.
And then the third poem in the collection is the Natalia Domini. So I had the chance to teach on Theodore Beza during the January term at a couple different seminaries, and I have to say, without Kirk Summers and Scott Manich, another scholar, I would have had almost nothing to present. So I used your material a lot. My students were really struck by the fact that the first poem is on Roman history, the second poem is on the death of Cicero, and then the third poem is on Christmas, right? The birth of Christ, Natalia Domini. So it wasn't as jarring to me because I've had the benefit of knowing a little bit more about the time period. But they were a little surprised because we don't think of poets having this kind of range of interest. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that Beza wanted these two worlds to merge, and I think that even though he sort of suppressed his knowledge of the ancient world, not his knowledge, but his outward love of the ancient world and his ministry going forward after this date, we know, in fact, that he continued to read this stuff. He just saw it all as one intellectual history. And there's a poem by one of his students, Giacomo, in the 1590s, where he's writing to Beza's library, and he's hoping that Beza's library will make room for his own little book of poetry. But he talks about the library and how Beza sort of retreats there with all these poets and so forth, and gets in his chair and reads this stuff. And there's a kind of allusion to Horace at the end of the poem. And it's a great poem because it gives us a look into Beza's life that maybe we didn't know, because all we see is him annotating the New Testament and involved in controversies and whatever. But Jacquemot says when he wants to escape all that and rest his mind from all this turmoil that's going on in the Christian world, he comes back to this material and just sits in the library and reads it.
I would have pegged Beza for more of a Hulu guy, but that's not what he was doing. He was retreating.
He was not.
Studying.
Where was I in the 60s and the 70s?
Yeah, studying the ancient poets.
Now, I'm curious about something, David, you alluded to earlier. So is it, did this become, these poems become kind of an albatross around his neck later on when he moved to Geneva? Did, like Cicero, or not like Cicero, but like Ovid, he got in trouble for these works that were scandalous in some way?
If I can interject, I'm just going to say that we should handle this after the break.
Okay.
So speaking of albatrosses,
it's time for the break.
Time for the break. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Ratio Coffee, the brainchild of entrepreneur Mark Helweg out in Portland, Oregon. What's Ratio up to these days, Jeff?
Well, Ratio is up to doing what they do best,
which
making high quality coffee machines that look great on your counter. But they're also they have another machine in the works, the so-called Ratio 4.
So why all the even numbers? Can't we get a Ratio 3 or a 7 or something?
That's a good question. I mean, those are kind of good, nice magic numbers.
I would think so.
We need to talk to Mr. Helwig about this. Yes,
maybe he's got a reason.
Right.
How do you feel about marsupods?
Marsupods?
Yeah.
I'm generally anti-marsupods.
Yeah, like the Gurek machine where you get this little kind of shot glass of coffee grounds and you pull a lever and it punctures it and then it drips and so forth.
Yeah. Nah, no thanks.
No?
It frightens me a little bit. Yeah, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
So how is the Ratio 4 going to be different?
Well, the Ratio 4, as their own copy says, they are as easy as pods, but so much better.
Tell us more.
So ever wonder what the convenience of a Keurig really costs? We did too. On average, $33 to $50 a pound, depending on the roaster. For mediocre coffee brewed with haste and waste at the forefront into throwaway plastic marsupods.
Oh.
That is, we, the Ratio guys, they offer a better way. Buy fresh from your local roaster and have the Ratio 4, brew up a cup. The taste will be monumentally better.
Okay. So it's the same basic technology as the Ratio 8 and 6 that we have been enjoying, but it's smaller, right?
Yep.
Fit on any countertop, 11.5 inches tall, 7.5 inches wide, smaller than the piece of paper on which this script is written.
Yeah.
Would you say it's built to last?
Absolutely.
Would you say backed by a 5-year warranty?
I would also say that is true, yes.
Would you say that they're available for purchase now?
Not yet.
Okay.
Right. We are eagerly awaiting the launch of this, and we will keep our audience informed. And I would love to have some sort of promotional deal. See if we work that out.
Ad Nauseam branded in kind of the puke orange for which we're known? Probably not.
No. Right. But yeah, for our audience who's been hearing about the 6 and the 8, but maybe thought I'd love to have that, but it's a little bit too rich for my blood, the Ratio 4 might be just what you need.
Okay. Yep. Did you brew some coffee yourself this morning?
Every morning.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's say that some ad nauserinos want to get on the bandwagon, the coffee wagon. They don't want to wait for the 4. What should they do?
Well, they should go to ratiocoffee.com. That's RATIO coffee.com. Have a look at the 6 and the 8. And if you want to get one of these wonderful machines, you can type in the coupon code ANCO2D.
ANCO2D.
D, yes, and that D stands for...
I don't know. What do you think the D stands for?
The go for is delicious.
Yeah, we said that before.
We did? Okay, all right.
How about delirious?
Delirious.
You just be so happy about your coffee, you'll be delirious.
There we go.
Is that a rap name, by the way?
Delirious?
Because that would be my rap handle.
You'd be...
Delirious.
Oh, yeah, exactly. D with maybe a dash.
That's right.
Delirious. I like it. Yeah, so if you go there, type in that coupon code ANCO2D, that will get you, dear listener, 15% off your entire order.
That's right.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you also by the good folks at Hackett Publishing. These guys have been with us since the very beginning. Hackett Publishing is famous, well known for their wide array of classical works as well as many other subject areas. High quality translations at a very affordable price.
Yeah. So Kirk has been talking about during this episode, and he will for the remainder, Theodore Beza's immense and deep knowledge of the classical world. And you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, but Beza was a genius. Okay, so maybe so. And maybe it's too late for some of us ever to learn as much Greek and Latin as he has forgotten. But you can still read the classics like Beza did it.
Yes.
In affordable, inexpensive, cheap translations.
Yeah.
But not cheap on quality.
No, not cheap on quality at all. In fact, I was just talking to one of my students as we were wrapping up our semester, and I was asking her, why did you take the class? And she says, I'm embarrassed to say it. She said, I love the class and I ended up really, really enjoying it. She says, but what I often look at is, what textbooks are the professors requiring? She
Interesting.
Says, and she told me, I opted out of one of the science classes because they wanted me to buy this $175 hardcover book. Wow. I just can't swing it.
Wow.
And I saw you were requiring us to buy Hackett's or Stanley Lombardo's Odyssey.
Nice.
For $7.99.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That is a great story.
Isn't that great? And yeah, I mean, the students complain all the time with good reason about the high cost of textbooks.
And let me guess, her economics class assigned a book called Sustainability.
Right.
And it was $250.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was that's
gold.
Perfect. It's gold. Right. And it's so $7.99, a great, a wonderful, accurate, readable translation with wonderful artwork. You can't go wrong.
You can't. So let's say you, listener, don't want to go wrong. Jeff, what should they do?
They should go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com. Scroll through their immense catalog, find the works that you want, drop them in the little grocery satchel, and if you type in this coupon code, AN2024, so AN ad nauseum plus the current year, that gets them two great things, which
gets them 1% off double the price for shipping.
No, come on now.
Sorry.
What did I say? It's 20% off.
Oh, 20% off.
And free shipping.
Free shipping, check it out.
Yeah, so as we get back into it, Kirk, I wonder if you could comment on how these poems were received later in Beza's career after he had moved to Geneva and the direction of his life changed, and did these poems become a scandal for him?
Yeah, and it's interesting that he did go to Geneva right away when he fled Paris. He wrote these poems, and some of them were a bit on the loose side, and he then had a deathbed experience, thought he was going to die, and he decided, I can no longer be a kind of closet Protestant, Lutheran, he probably would have called it at the time. I'm going to flee Paris, and I think too he had to flee Paris because some of the poems were pretty critical of Catholicism. So anyway, he did go to Geneva, but the work for him immediately after he fled was in Lausanne. And so he ended up going to Lausanne. And before they would hire him, he had to explain and publicly apologize for this poetry that he had written.
The one poem in particular, right, where he says he can't choose between the friendship of Candida and is it Adalbertus? Is that the other?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And that's the poem that became sort of the most scandalous, even though I don't even think it's the most scandalous of all the poems. But it's the poem that sort of dogged him. One of his students, Claude Desnosse, I guess it was. But anyway, he had moved away from Lausanne, and then he began to attack Beza using his poetry and saying he's dissolute and so forth. And so you can understand Beza's position that I'm in this world that's very Christian, and a lot of people are not extremely educated, like I was educated in the humanist tradition, and it's harmful to my ministry right now to not separate myself, distance myself from this poetry. So he writes things like, I shouldn't even talk about these things and shouldn't imitate what it's not right to do. That's one of his lines, you know. But in saying that, he's also giving a defense, basically saying you don't understand what this poetry is about. It is not immoral and it's not autobiographical, he says specifically, sort of quoting Catullus and Marshall on that. It's following in a certain tradition, there are generic expectations here, and I followed them. All I did was write Roman poetry, right? And I did a pretty good job of it, but now you're going to attack me. But interestingly, he says, you're only attacking me because I converted, because there are a lot of you, and you know that's what you're doing. He says, there are a lot of you who are still doing it, and nobody attacks you, right? You're writing equally, sort of risque kind of poetry, edgy poetry, and nobody says a word about it. So the difference is that I converted, and now you want to use it to undermine my position with the community here. Well, I think that people have latched onto that first part about him apologizing for it, and you'll always read in the books that he backed away from this poetry and he regretted it. Yeah, he did, but if you really read all the text throughout, he didn't really regret it. He regretted they didn't get it, or they were pretending not to get it. And when he is dedicating the 1597 final edition of his poetry, which has mostly Christian writing, he's dedicating it to an important Polish family, and he's writing to them about it. He says, I got into a lot of trouble imitating Catullus, but he says, but there's really nothing wrong with Catullus. He is a great poet. Yeah. And so you can see even there at the end, I'm not going to back off from this. This is great literature.
Yeah. So when he fled Paris in 1548, he was married to, was it Claudine Desnosse? Is that her name?
That's right. That's her name.
Yeah. And so they had a secret common law marriage before that. And if I'm remembering, it's been, I don't know, 3 or 4 months since I read the articles that you wrote. One of his defenses for why his morality was chaste, even if his muse was spotted or something, is that he was married at the time that he wrote some of this. So it's clearly fictional. It's not intended to be autobiographical. Is that right?
That's right. And there's something about one of his poems mentioning Candida being pregnant, but Claudine never was pregnant or something like that. But backing up to this marriage thing, a lot of people misunderstand marriage at this time. Like if you were in Geneva and you got married, you weren't having a big wedding ceremony like we have today. You could be in a tavern with some of your friends standing around and marry somebody on the spot, and there were witnesses to it, and then you just sign a little contract and it's done. And that was a valid marriage and that's how a lot of the people got married back in the day. So it's really not surprising that Beza hanging out at the brew pub with his friends, and maybe Claudine is there somehow, and they got married there, but they just didn't spread it widely.
I see. Something. That's how you and Rebecca got married, right, Jeff?
In a tavern.
Yeah, it was
friends gassing
Miller Lite and a bowl of pretzels.
Yeah,
so we're here. We might as well get married.
Right, exactly. The glass ring, right? You knock it off the top of the bottle. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
It strikes me as you talk about Beza apologizing, but also kind of defending his poetry. I mean, this is nothing new under the sun. Songwriters, filmmakers, complaining about audiences not getting the work and taking a character in a film or a persona in a song to be identical with the person producing the work. I mean, that's human, right? That's there's nothing new there. Yeah.
Sometimes an actor or an actress will portray a character and then they can't shake it. Everybody,
exactly. Right. So how would you say, I mean, one of, just for the audience's benefit, another really important work by Kirk is 2016 Morality After Calvin, which I got to review, and it's just fantastic work. And there he talks about Beza and several other important individuals, and translates some of Beza's poetry, including a beautiful poem about a chicken who lays how many eggs? Something like 15. It's really remarkable. It's a great story. But my question for Kirk is, how do you think Beza's early training in poetry trained him for later theological polemics and other kinds of Christian work?
Yeah. You've read Beza, and it's a whole different ballgame reading Beza than reading most Latin writers. The guy was well-trained in rhetoric. But the one thing that really strikes me about Beza from the very beginning, and this is what I've been doing a lot lately and writing about, even tracing his writing, is that he is fascinated with imagery. And poetry is imagery. And he has his favorite phrase, like in talking about Dido, for example, he said, Virgil didn't describe the death of Dido, he depicted it. And he loves that phrase because depicting has to do with painting. So he sort of painted a picture of Dido dying with words. And that is Beza's aspiration. He loves images. He kept them on his walls. He published these emblems, which are, they could be about anything, but they're just little wood cuts in which he writes a poem underneath saying something about the woodcuts. He publishes images of people important for the Reformation and writes a little sketch about them, and often includes a poem. But not only that, even in his annotations, he'll launch into a sort of vivid description where he sort of paints a picture for you of something, ritual, for example, in the Catholic Church, the Pope celebrating the Jubilee year, and he'll go into a long description of it because he just loves to create that image in the mind of his reader. And so I've been sort of tracing that imagery, and at the same time, I've really gotten into Aristotle. I've been teaching it a lot, and I've come to realize that the imagination in Aristotle's theory of the soul was the key to all of this. That was the spot, that was the place in process of us getting information and reasoning about it. That was the spot where things went awry. And you see it in Calvin, you see it in Beza. It's the imagination where the fall took place. Because it can't be in the senses, because if we're bringing in wrong information, we've got no hope at all, right?
Correct.
If we can't trust our senses. So we bring in all this information as sort of processed in what Aristotle called the common sense, but then it's brought up where it is sort of imaged, in the imagination.
Right.
And there are a lot of things that can cause that image to get distorted. And Aristotle talked about, it could be sickness or lack of sleep or stress or whatever. But for Calvin and Beza, it was the fall.
Right.
The fall was causing those images to be distorted. So Beza's goal then is to sort of image Christianity, to correct those images for people with his writing. And so anyway, I really think it's a feature of Beza's work.
That's fascinating. Yeah. It clearly can't be in reason per se either, because a syllogism is either correct or it's not. You can't misrepresent modus ponens. You can believe a lot of fallacies, but once you explain to a person this is how it works, if A then B, I suppose you could choose the wrong premises, right? But it's not clear to me how reason itself per se could be corrupted. It has more to do with the ends to which it's put.
Because Beza would say that we would cease to to be a human being if we could no longer reason, we could no longer sense.
Right.
Right. But those images we can be reasoning based on wrong information.
Oh, that's really fascinating. Do you want to talk about the chicken poem a little bit as we start to wind up the episode?
All I recall about it is that I got criticized for spending too much time on it.
What?
Yeah. Analyzing it too much. That's all I really remember about it.
Well, I think that a little chicken is called a pullet, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you should have gotten like a Pulitzer Prize, I would say, for man. Ouch. That's pretty bad. But I think if I remember, Beza's an old man at the time. It's the 1590s, right? And he writes this poem about a chicken, and he marvels at how many chicks this hen can produce. And he basically says, Lord, I'm much less useful because look at how long I have been around and how little I've produced by comparison.
Old age really weighed on Beza, and he just lived forever.
Yeah.
What, 88?
80
or so? And
86, I think.
86, yeah. And he, various times when he was 70, he wrote to, who was it? One of his friends and said, I think this is it. I'm about to die. And
got another 16 years. And there was a rumor circulated at one point, right? He's got a fascinating life. Some of his Jesuit opponents said, Beza has died, and on his deathbed, he came back to the Roman Church.
Rumors of my death are premature or whatever.
Right.
And
so he had to write
that.
Yeah, he had to write a letter saying, look, I'm still here. So, yeah. Maybe as a kind of final thing for me, and then Jeff, whatever you want to ask too. I don't want to monopolize this. You've mentioned a number of times, Kirk, Beza's annotations. And because I know that's one of the things you're working on now, maybe we can give our listeners just a little bit of a hint of what the annotations are and what you're contributing to them.
Yeah. So in 1556, Beza was asked by Stephanus, the great printer and scholar, to create a Latin translation of the New Testament and to annotate it, which he did, a first edition, but it really wasn't until he got to the 1582 edition that we see him using a lot of a couple Greek manuscripts that others hadn't looked at, and he's also using the collation of Stephanus himself on some manuscripts in the Paris library. And so he puts together a Greek text, a Latin translation. It goes through two more editions after that, the 1589, 1598. There are some minor editions where some of the annotations are sort of excerpted and smaller edition is created. But this was his masterpiece. This is what he spent his time on. And the annotations, while some of them get off into, theology and analyzing the meaning of the text, a lot of it is he's questioning as he's translating, what is the precise way to understand this Greek text? So what is the Latin that's going to most say what the author wanted to say? And he says in the introduction to the annotations that this has got to be an international. I'm just putting the text out there, but I want everyone to write me and tell me, their opinion and where I could clean it up and do better. And we have those letters. People are writing him and saying, this word doesn't mean that, or it should, here it means this, or you misunderstood that. And he'll fix, or he'll argue against them, or whatever. So it's an evolving kind of translation. It is really the text that becomes the basis of the King James Version of the Bible. So it's extremely influential. And it's really the basis of the Geneva Bible as well, the later Geneva Bible. So extremely influential and fascinating, because there aren't many commentators who are quite doing it the way Beza was doing it. There's just the way that he was looking for every nuance of every word and trying to grasp it.
And I found him to be incredibly accurate, better than Erasmus, not as conservative as Calvin, more willing to change the traditional interpretation if he believes it's incorrect. Time and again, when I go to the annotations, it's just really, really accurate. And so you're about to publish something on that, right?
Yeah, I'm actually working on Beza's annotations on James. And I just sort of, I want to see what would be the response if we put out a very readable translation, a very usable text that ministers could use in their preparation. It's just one of the tools they might be looking at. Could Beza's work be made usable and useful today? Mm-hmm. As a standalone commentary on a book of the Bible. And I really think it could be, and I want to create a translation it's that readable, just the average minister out there, theological student can use it.
Excellent. Hey, well, Kirk, we want to be respectful of your time, and before we let you go, if you could maybe comment any kind of parting comments that you would have to Latin students, Latin teachers out there by way of instruction, encouragement, as you kind of think about the state of classics out there today. What's your take?
Yes, well, I could go any number of directions here, I guess, but what I would say is that as you read through Latin and you read through these texts, humanist kind of experience that you're going to have, so keep a notebook. Write down the things that interest you, the interesting sayings, words that fascinate you, anything like that, and just keep it going for years. And you'll be surprised when you look at that. You're going to find what has got you interested and what it is that you are, what has grabbed you about this material, because you're going to see the pattern in what you've been taking notes on. And I've done it myself. I got these notebooks. Whole image idea that I came up with in Beza's works came out of a notebook. I just flipping through one day and said, it's everywhere, and I saw it in a kind of subconscious way, and I kept writing it down, but I didn't know I was writing it down until later I went back through and looked at it. So, it's kind of it's a journey that you can take, and you will find out something about yourself out there, and you will find something great too.
Excellent advice.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know, Kirk, that you have, you've listened to the podcast a little bit. We gave you a shout out in your Virgil class, I think a long time ago, as a more senior scholar than ourselves. Is there any scolding that we deserve? You want to knock our heads together like Mo, anything you want us to know is like your own parting shot before we say goodbye?
I think you're intimidating your guests by being too funny and too good at what you guys do. That's what I think.
I thought Jeff was toning it down the last 10 or 15 episodes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kirk, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We'll have you back on at some point if you'll be amenable to that. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kirk.
Well, Jeff, that just about wraps it up for today, doesn't it?
It does. Before we get out of here, though, Dave, I wonder if you could tell the audience a bit about your Moss method and your also your method out there for learning Latin.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost into summertime when the living is easy.
Yes.
Fish are jumping and the cotton is high.
Yes.
Your daddy's rich. Is that true? And your mom is good looking?
Is that how it goes?
That's how it goes.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe it's time to learn some Greek.
Perfect. What a great summertime activity.
It is, really. And so I have the perfect thing for you, mossmethod.com, 4 modules. It will take you from...
neophyte to erudite.
That's correct. I have compressed into these lessons the last 30 plus years of my own study and teaching of Greek. So I am first and foremost a student, and I think that I am a more experienced student than many of you, so you can learn from my mistakes.
Excellent.
And you can get the course, get started. We've got whiteboard videos. You've got assignments. You're reading real, live, interesting stories, not just memorize a grammatical rule, read a little sentence, forget it, go to the next one. Actual connected stories from Aesop and Plato and Aristophanes. It's great stuff.
Sounds good.
It's very affordable, and you also get the office hours.
That's where you get to meet. They get to meet with you, with students from around the world.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Every Friday we meet in the mornings. We read some Greek. I'll answer any questions that you have, which I am able to answer, or I'll find that answer for you. It's great fun.
Fantastic. And if they go to mousmethod.com, they can sample some free stuff.
I got tons of stuff on my YouTube channel. Almost 2,100 free videos now.
Wow.
Over 100 free Greek videos, maybe 200, I can't remember. The rest are Latin.
Yeah.
A lot of free instruction. So, there's really no excuse not to learn Greek or Latin. I understand if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But I can't understand somebody saying, "Oh, I really want to, but I can't."
Right.
Come on.
Exactly. No excuses.
No, there's lots available.
Right. And now what if our listeners out there want to learn some Latin?
Correct. LatinPerDiem.com/LLPSI, Lingua Latina Per Se Illustrata. And there I take you through the Hans Orberg book, Lingua Latina Per Se Illustrata, which means Latin teaches itself. And so I'm teaching students in a Zoom studio, you might say, and it's great fun. We tease and make fun of each other a little bit. We applaud and scold. And I heard recently from one of my students that although they are enjoying learning the Latin, what they are really enjoying is the interaction between myself and the other students.
Oh, fantastic.
It's like reality TV Latin. I never expected that.
Yeah.
And so Unit 1, we're going to have a little bit of a price increase here pretty soon. So you might want to take advantage of this before the price goes up. Unit 2 is going to have a beta launch coming up at a highly discounted price. And if you allow me just this one other thing, if you are a sometime student of Latin, but you don't want to sign up for a course that costs around $300, I have the perfect solution. It's called an audit. So I have a number of Latin masterclasses where I am teaching students Cicero, Theodore Beza, John Calvin, and others. And you can take the course for a very low price of $75.
Wow, fantastic.
And then you watch the 10 lessons. You can interact with me. I'll give you a quiz and an exam if you want to test yourself. It really gives you access to a new world of learning.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And this is latinperdiem.com
That's correct.
LLPSI.
Yeah, the entire Latin Per Diem site has this kind of information.
Fantastic.
Jeff, we need to thank some people.
Of course. Mishka, our intrepid engineer, who, especially when it comes to interviews, there's lots of kind of extra steps.
There are.
Recording Zooms. She's managing audio.
She handles makeup. She handles the lighting.
Choreography.
The concession. We've got the table with only no green M&Ms,
exactly.
right? Or
all our ridiculous demands.
That's right.
Yep.
She sets up the stage, tears down the drum set, just one thing after the next.
Yep, she's amazing. And then also, the great music you hear throughout the episode, Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin on guitar.
Yes.
Incredible guys.
So generous with their musicianship.
Yes, definitely. So thanks to them as always. And hey, if you want to get a shout out, you got an idea for an episode, you got a question, do not hesitate to contact us. You can contact Dave at dave@adnauseum.com. Don't forget that V.
Or contact Jeff. Let's face it, he is the approachable, friendly, cuddly, affirming one.
I'm the good cop.
That's right. You're the good cop. Yeah. So send Jeff a kind of a message. Thank him for doing such a great job, for putting up with me, and he'll get back to you eventually. Jeff at adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V.
Yeah.
What about if they want a t-shirt?
Oh, head on over to our website, adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V. And check out our Lurch with Merch section and pick yourself up one of the wonderful black t-shirts with the orange.
Hercules is doing something.
He's wrestling with a Nemean lion.
Dribbling a basketball. No, he's holding up the world.
There you go.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And next week, Dave, what are we up to?
We're going back to Henri René Marius.
Yes.
A History of Education in Antiquity.
Yeah.
And we're going to deal with the little known but very important character, Isocrates.
So not Socrates, Socrates.
We skipped from A Socrates through A Socrates through H Socrates.
Yes.
We went right to Isocrates.
It's what you got to do, right?
And Jeff, I believe you have the gustatory parting shot.
I do, and for this one, I went to my go-to for comedic takes on food, Mr. Jim Gaffigan.
All right.
Right, and he says, of course you can't talk about Southern food without bringing up grits, right? It was like someone said, hey, if you like biscuits and gravy, without the taste of biscuits and gravy, you'll love our man-made wet sand. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.